So the first law we'll cover today, you've probably heard about. It's the PUMP Act. That stands for Providing Urgent Maternal Protections for Nursing Mothers. This law protects the right to pump milk at work for at least 1 year following birth, and it applies to companies of all sizes. The primary standards of the PUMP Act were things that you are probably familiar with because they've pretty much been in place since 2010. But the big news of the PUMP Act is that it expanded federal requirements to cover all sorts of employees. So it now covers exempt and non-exempt employees, including folks who had previously been excluded from workplace breastfeeding protections, like teachers, agricultural workers, managers, and registered nurses. Under the PUMP Act, employees can seek remedies for noncompliance through a complaint with the Department of Labor or a private legal action. And unlike the old laws, the PUMP Act does have some potential for heavy damages. One thing to note is that there is a provision in the law saying that there can be a 10-day notice period before a lawsuit is filed, but there is no notice period for needing breaks or space. And an employer could be in violation of the PUMP Act if they don't provide a worker with the lactation breaks and space that they need on their very first day back to work. So again, that lovely point that you just made, Cassie, about being prepared in advance, getting ready is so important. At the end of the session, we'll also have some links available for you that will flesh this out a bit more. One of the things that we'll see is a resource on transportation workers. There are some different rights for folks who are operating motor coaches, trains, or airplanes. They have some different rights, but other than that, this law applies to just about everyone nationwide. So under the PUMP Act, lactation rooms have to be available to any lactating employee on site whenever they need it. And that space has to be clean, not a bathroom. It needs to be essentially functional as a lactation space, right? So rooms without ventilation that are scorching hot or freezing cold might be a problem under the PUMP Act. The space also, very importantly, has to be free from intrusion. Usually that means a lock on the door, but it could also be things like a curtain or divider, like you see here in the picture. It must also be shielded from view. So curtains on the windows, on the doors, maybe a sign on the door that people actually respect could make a lactation space suitable under the PUMP Act. But finally, as we said at the outset, I think it's really important to also remember that the PUMP Act applies in addition to any other state or local laws that might impact you. We'll give you a link to a place at the end of the session where you can go and just double check that you're familiar with the laws that apply in your state. Some states and localities do go beyond the requirements of PUMP by, for example, saying that you have to provide electricity, running water, or providing the space for a longer period of time. But no employer across the country should be going beneath the standards that you see laid out with PUMP.
And a lot of times with our clients, we end up seeing that they take the state that they're in with the strictest regulations and applying it to all their sites for consistency. So looking at the state level is really helpful and beneficial.
That is a hugely important point, and so important because a lot of these lactating employees are talking. They know if Jane has better accommodations than Joey, that's going to be an issue. So you definitely want to pick the strongest standard you can and go with it so that you're not breeding resentment amongst your employees or causing unnecessary questions for your HR staff to sort through. So that was the space requirements under the PUMP Act. Just a few notes on what PUMP requires in terms of the breaks. You heard me say this at the beginning. Nursing parents are allowed to take pumping breaks as often as needed. And that really varies from person to person. Somebody who is nursing a very young child, maybe they came back to work without a lot of maternity leave, they're very likely to need frequent breaks. Often, as a child ages, breaks are less frequent. But you never know what's going to happen. Growth spurts occur. All kinds of medical conditions come up. So people have varied needs. And the Pump Act requires employers to meet the employees really where they are with their own health and needs. Breaks under the Pump Act apply to any employee. So that could be someone who's on site, off site. It could even be someone like me who's working remotely. Any time that the employee is on the clock, the employer has an obligation to make sure that they're able to take care of their lactation needs. Breaks may be paid or unpaid, and the law on this can be a little bit confusing. So we'll also have a resource on this at the end of the session. But typically speaking, for the majority of folks, breaks would continue to be paid for exempt employees, usually folks who are working on a salary. They don't have to clock in and clock out daily. They shouldn't have to do that for their pumping breaks either. Should be paid for any employee performing work while pumping or while using an existing paid break. Of course, you can't force employees to work. They need to be relieved of all of their duties. But if they choose, for example, to answer emails while they're pumping or answer the phone, they should still be paid for that time. They should also continue to be paid when those paid breaks are required by another federal or state law or municipal ordinance. So we actually have 4 states now where paid lactation breaks are required. That's Illinois, Georgia, Minnesota, and New York. New York just enacted a rule to require at least 30 minutes of paid break time each time the worker needs to pump. And then finally, again, there are some other situations where workers should be paid for that break time. Check out the resource at the end of the session for more details on that.